Twitter as well, or into X, excuse me. So, hey, this is Dave Michaels from Talking Points. I'm with David Danto from Talking Points. God, it still seems odd to say. Today, Dave and David are going to be talking about the Crowdstrike outage that
occurred. What the heck happened today? What a bad day.
It happened today. It's been a long day. And it is a long day. I don't know if anyone's watching us live or not. Certainly not on X, but if you are watching live, that's great. Looks like we already have some comments. I'll go check those out in a second. But I think most of the people, Dave, will probably be watching this after the fact. But Dave, why don't you start us off and explain what happened? Because how do we get from Starbucks being out this morning to a collaboration topic? What's going on here?
I needed to call my credit card company this morning to talk to them about something, and I called the 800 number on the back of the card. And when the IVR system picked me up, it said, "We can't take your call right now. Call back another time. Bye." So that's how major companies were handling it. Airports were writing blank, handwritten boarding passes. We're all back to the Stone Ages, stone knives, bearskins, the rest of it. What happens is that systems are very vulnerable nowadays to hacking and breaches. And so there's this company called Crowdstrike that provides endpoint security on the actual servers and devices that are being used for all of these services. And they pushed out an update to everyone that was using it, which is a lot of companies. And the update basically bricked the devices. It created, the Windows blue screen of death. And the big problem with it was it then turned it into a reboot cycle. And every time it rebooted, it was having the same problem. So it was not a problem that could be fixed remotely. You literally had to put the device into safe mode.
So it's just a couple of Windows PCs. What's the big deal, Dave? I don't get
it. We've become a remote, agile world is the problem. So while all of these systems have the same protections and have the same vulnerabilities, and we want to get these 0-day vulnerabilities fixed, patched immediately across the board, we're also now creating a single point of failure across most of the systems that are running Windows. So, Windows Server, it didn't affect Linux, it didn't affect Apple, but, the thing that we do to make this stuff easier so that we can attack problems quicker is the same thing we're doing by creating a single point of vulnerability that one, bad keystroke takes the whole world down.
So sometimes when I interview people, I play dumb and I kind of know the answers already, but I don't know the answers to these because I never heard of CrowdStrike. And so let me ask you, is this a Microsoft problem or is this a CrowdStrike problem? Because it only affected Microsoft users. And so do you have any light on that subject?
Well, I'm not the expert in security either, but I will point out that CrowdStrike is not Microsoft. It's a third party. It's a third-party program that's installed specifically to help further protect systems that are determined to be vulnerable. It's obviously things that CISOs are doing specifically to make their systems more safe. I've read some things online today that Microsoft has some, specifically in our space, in the UCC space, Microsoft has some hardened PCs they use for MTR that they claim should absolutely not have been using CrowdStrike, and it took them down when it shouldn't have. And there was some debate back and forth online there. But we live in a world where third-party endpoint protection is going to take place. And
so I think that's really the point I wanted to get to, is that in our increasingly connected world, we need to be very smart and aware of all the vulnerabilities in the network, which is, network, endpoints, applications, etc. And they all require a level of defense. And so CrowdStrike is specifically targeting endpoints for security, but people put this stuff on because they want their endpoints secure. And so this was obviously an unfortunate incident, but it's also it could happen without third party. I mean, it could have been. You just used the term 0-day. What do you call it? 0-day
vulnerability.
Attacks. And so what that means, 0-day, is that it's a brand new vulnerability, never before detected, that just got identified. Some hacker figured out a vulnerability. And this happens all the time. It happens in every operating system. It could happen in applications. Usually applications aren't that vulnerable, but it could happen in applications. And some applications, like security applications in particular, have a lot of rights. and they can do a lot of things, and so it can be dangerous. And so,
well, there's
so
also
it's not necessarily. I saw somebody made a comment about this is a problem with third-party stuff. It's not necessarily a third. It's really a problem of the world we live in being ever connected. And I just use one app I'm familiar with. I use Signal, which is a end-to-end encrypted messaging app, and I am amazed at how often I have to update that app. I think most of our apps just kind of update in the background, but for some reason Signal doesn't do that, and I always have to approve it. But it's a couple times a week, and that's just an application. And so some of these products are really updating a lot, and there's just no way. I remember, Dave. I'm sure you remember this stuff too. We would get a new update when I was in IT. We would get a new update from a software vendor, and we would put it on test systems. And we would spend months evaluating it, and then eventually decide to roll it out into production if we felt like it. But now it's like,
it's a completely different world we live in. That's, if you see over my shoulder with the junk back there, you've got Mr. Peabody and Sherman and their Wayback Machine. That's what it was like way back. We would decide if an update is one that we wanted. We'd skip some. We would test them. We would do all this work. And now we live in a world with agile frameworks for software development, where literally you wake up in the morning, turn your computer on, and buttons you used yesterday have been moved to another position. IT managers are no longer doing that testing. They're now just saying, fine, let it through, because the attacks are coming just as quickly. But we've lost as much as we've gained. By letting these things through, by letting these updates through, not only are we confusing end users, certainly in our space, in the unified communication space, but we're now subjecting ourselves to one fat finger that some update went out. And honestly, it was kind of hidden today by the big CrowdStrike global failure. But there was also an Azure failure today that took Microsoft Teams out for a short period of time. My wife couldn't get onto our Office 365. She's working for a healthcare organization right now. That was kind of hidden beneath all of that, a completely different problem. It was the 8th time this year that happened. So it is very, very weird that we're in this boat right now. We're, unfortunately, we're all kind of susceptible to one bad change taking everything down.
Well, let's get to what we really want to talk about. That was just what we call the intro. What we really want to talk about is how and why this is relevant to unified communications collaboration, because it's not necessarily obvious up front, but I use UCC as my catch-all term, but I mean telephony, I mean meetings, I mean chat. And I think most people think of these systems today, these cloud-based systems today, as we're worried about the servers, the actual application going down. And I know that most of the providers have had outages. You just mentioned one at Microsoft, but I think most of the providers have had outages of some kind. And people joke about, oh, no more meetings, you have to go home early, all that kind of stuff. But that's one level. As I said, there's different levels of security. But the CrowdStrike thing is particularly around endpoints, and so now I've set it up. I don't know what I want to say. Why don't you go ahead and start, Dave?
Well, all right. It's something that we really need to think about. We just had a really terrific conversation with Microsoft Ilya Buchstein about MDEP, about a new platform that they're coming out with specifically to cover Android endpoints, the ones that aren't on Windows and Rooms. And it's exactly the same situation that we've been discussing with the good and the bad. By moving everything over to a single image, a single type of Android that Microsoft is building security for, everything will be able to get updates very quickly. Everything will be able to get, all the changes in one place. It's a great idea for security, but it also means that one fat finger from somebody at Microsoft or somebody on Android or somebody anywhere is now going to take down all of these systems, because instead of having an OS from Poly and an OS from Neat and an OS on your phone and a different OS from the next manufacturer and all that, you're now going to have a single, if we go with this, we're going to have a single type of platform that can be shut down. And, obviously endpoint manufacturers have messed up updates before throughout the years.
So you just said, a risk of being, a system being shut down. That's what happened today. Systems were shut down and business came to a halt for some companies. But it's actually a bigger risk than that, because that was what today's risk was. Today's risk was the computer went into a reboot cycle and couldn't get out of it. But people don't realize, I think, it's not obvious why a meeting room, for example, needs to be secure. And it's like, oh, I hacked into the the meeting room. I managed to load Pac-Man on it, and I had a blast. I did, or I managed to get my email on it. Whatever. It's like that's not really the threat that we're talking about. People have to realize that meeting rooms in particular, they're always on, and so they're always on even when the building's closed or whatever, lights are off. But they have access to a lot of stuff, and so the obvious stuff, without even thinking about it, is they have access to email, they have access to calendaring systems, they have access to lots of different systems like that. That means they have access to the servers, they have things like that. But the less obvious stuff is they also have access to metadata, who's meeting with who. It's a lot of meetings, just the very fact that certain people are meeting, or two companies are meeting together, or whatever, or a meeting taking place on this particular topic, like an acquisition, could be very confidential. So the metadata is sensitive, and then also there's we're getting into this era where we're transcribing meetings. We're doing whiteboard sessions in the meetings. We're sharing content in the meetings. There's all kinds of very confidential stuff that occurs in the meeting. And so if you were able to hack into a meeting room system and eavesdrop, for a month or so, that can be quite damaging for an organization.
There's less of a danger of that happening today than there was when we were using analog connections and analog systems. Analog's the wrong word, but ISDN.
I would say there's more of a risk, because you're talking about the tapping wires and stuff like that. I'm talking about installing and getting into a malicious software on these systems.
It is as risky as any other compute device on the network.
Okay. Well, you could say that, but I'm saying that these meeting rooms have a lot of very sensitive data. IT might make sure that I, as a user, don't have a lot of access to sensitive data. I don't know what the boardroom's talking about, but the boardroom system knows what the board's talking about. And so these are systems that need to get first grade, whatever you want to call it, I guess, AA security. These meeting room systems, and so you mentioned the fact that having all based on the new Microsoft MDEP could be both a double-edged sword, but it's not just MDEP, right? I mean, if you were in the Teams environment and you had all Windows-based systems, which would be considered more secure by a lot of people, the same kind of thing could happen there.
I think the important point here is that it's probably a bad idea to vote for all systems being homogenized.
I think that's really good, but you cut me off because I was picking on Microsoft. I got to say the same thing about Room OS. I got to say the same thing about the systems running Zoom rooms. But your point is exactly correct. That if you have a like system, enterprise-wide, and maybe you did that on purpose. Maybe you like the Logitech upgrade utilities or the HP Poly upgrade utility. So maybe you did that on purpose. It's a double-edged sword. And so if you could upgrade them all in one fell swoop, they could also be attacked in one fell swoop. So your remedy, David, now is the time you have your remedy. Now is the time.
Well, one of the most important points to make from my years and scars of being in the AV industry is you have to understand that the backup plan and the emergency plan are two completely different things. You got to have them both. One is your go-to that's hopefully not very visible to the users, and the other one is, all right, if everything else fails, let's take this thing out. And we were for Y2K, we were planning on using ham radios to be live from Times Square when the radio station was going to go down. So you always have to have multiple backups online. And we've entered a world where cost savings is now key, and most companies no longer even think about this anymore. They don't think about the problem they'll run into by saving money when they have this exposure of having no backup plan and no hardening. So it's if you always remember, we build hammers was what the hardware store said when their IT people said you need to harden your system some more. And then you pay for it in reputational damage after the fact. So having multiple systems, having hardened systems, having something to go to. If the type A system you're using is completely failed, make sure your type B system doesn't depend on anything type A does. And that's not as easy to do today because you've got third parties, you've got common carriers, you've got your network providers. Just because you've got all of your type of system A's out of the loop doesn't mean your providers do. So it's complicated, but homogenization. I'm not going to vote for every system being the same. I like having different kinds of systems that, if they do go down, they go down at different times.
David, you're not keeping up with current politics. DEI is out. You're not supposed to have diversity right now. That's out. And so, but
that's a sad commentary, but let's not go there. I think equipment diversity is important.
Let's go back. Let's leave meetings for just a moment. I think meetings is the big opportunity here for this conversation. But I said UCC earlier, and so I saw somebody on LinkedIn. They commented about their daughter was at Starbucks and couldn't pay with a credit card, and because of the outage, and he arranged to rescue her with a Starbucks account. But it's not just meeting rooms that have UC clients. And so if you're running a UC client, and I think the major UC clients are Teams, WebEx, and Zoom. I think most of the other ones are web-based, which is another kind of vulnerability. But if you're running a client, and I guess it's really kind of the same vulnerability. The Starbucks story was they rebooted their PCs, and they couldn't take it. But if you're running a contact center, let's say, and all your agents are using a desktop of some kind, and they need to use that desktop to take calls, this could be a vulnerability to a contact center just as easily.
Sure. And again, when we were talking before about Android and, Android and Windows, the two primary, appliance type platforms that we use for communications, a lot of things are running it. I don't think that's you'll correct me. You'll know better than I will. I don't think Cisco's running Skinny anymore in the phones. I think, most IP phones nowadays are running Android or one version or another. So it's not just the room systems. It's not just what we think of Android from an UC standpoint. It's everything. And
so the only thing I'll clarify on that is that Android isn't one thing. Like Windows is one thing. There's different versions of Windows, but Android has got so many different. You can't even call them versions. So many different builds. That there's the Google-controlled Androids that are on the smartphones that have the Play Store, and then a lot of devices manufacturers and car manufacturers are using the open source Android to make their own version of Android, and so we don't know what third-party utilities may or may not be in those tools. And so if you hear a headline like all the Android systems are being attacked or vulnerable or down. It's probably not all the Android systems. It might be all of one kind of a flavor, which But
I'm going to give you the contrarian point of view just as an example, so nobody get angry at me for using this as an example. At Infocom that just passed up about a month ago, you had manufacturer Yealink saying that they've committed every one of their Android devices, their phones, their systems, everything on Android will now be on Microsoft's MDEP build. So if there was a flaw with a fat finger on an MDEP update, everything you own that Yealink would be down. So you're trying to fix it, and you can't pick up a phone because the phone's not working, and everybody's on their
But on the flip side, if there was a 0-day vulnerability on
Yealink
phones would be the only ones working, right?
It's the double-edged sword. It's exactly what we're talking about, the world we live in today. And I don't have a great solution other than I've got a blog out there from 2016 that I posted in one chat today that people should read about how all companies are now making us, the users, unpaid beta testers. They send out, honestly, builds that are not, and hardware that's not fully tested yet, and expect the end users to do the cleanup by putting in tickets. And honestly, that is not a good place to be. These things should be tested more thoroughly before being pushed.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have to say on this particular video. But I know we have more to say because I've seen some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and so I think there's going to be some more content coming up from Talking Points on this. But it was definitely an eye-opening day. I'd like to thank my colleague David Danto here, who actually had this idea earlier in the day when it would have been a good time to do it, but I resisted. So thank you for pushing on that, Dave. And myself, Dave Michaels, happy to participate, late as it is. And thank you all for watching. And we'll be back soon with something even more interesting, if you could imagine that. Thank you so much.
Everybody have a great weekend.